You read with me from John chapter 11, verses 1 to 7, and then skipping down from 17 to 53. A certain man, Lazarus, was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This was the Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, saying, "Lord, the one whom you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness isn't fatal. It's for the glory of God, so that God's Son can be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. When he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was. After 2 days, he said to his disciples, "Let's return to Judea again." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was a little less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to comfort Martha and Mary after their brother's death. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary remained in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask God, God will give you." Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha replied, "I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She replied, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, God's Son, the one who is coming into the world." After she said this, she went and spoke privately to her sister Mary. "The teacher is here and he's calling for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to Jesus. He hadn't entered the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were comforting Mary in the house saw her get up quickly and leave, they followed her. They assumed she was going to mourn at the tomb. When Mary arrived where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying also, he was deeply disturbed and troubled. He asked, "Where have you laid him?" They replied, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to cry. The Jews said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "He healed the eyes of the man born blind. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was deeply disturbed again when he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone covered the entrance. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, the smell will be awful. He's been dead 4 days." Jesus replied, "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see God's glory?" So they removed the stone. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. I know you always hear me. I say this for the benefit of the crowd standing here, so that they will believe that you sent me." Having said this, Jesus shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his feet bound and his hands tied and his face covered with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Therefore many of the Jews who came with Mary and saw what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. The chief priests and Pharisees called together the council and said, "What are we going to do? This man is doing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our people." One of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, told them, "You don't know anything. You don't see that it's better for you that one man die for the people rather than the whole nation be destroyed." He didn't say this on his own. As high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would soon die for the nation. And not only for the nation, Jesus would also die so that God's children scattered everywhere would be gathered together as one. From that day on, they plotted to kill him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you all for being here. It's good to see familiar faces and not so familiar faces. Hi. So I feel like that passage is already a sermon in itself in some ways. It is long, but I felt there wasn't really a good way to get just little snippets of that passage without just reading the whole of it So thanks, Beth, for doing that. I think it's a passage that we're all, or most of us, are fairly familiar with. When we open John 11, we enter into a house that is full of grief. Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha send for Jesus. By the time Jesus arrives, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. The scene moves from urgent plea to sealed tomb, from raw lament to a public reversal of death itself. Jesus calls a name, a body comes out, and a community is forced to reckon with what it means when life breaks into places we thought were finished. Bethany is not a neutral backdrop. It is situated just outside Jerusalem. It's under Roman occupation. In that world, death is political, a tool used by empire and by local authorities to preserve order through fear, spectacle, and execution. When Jesus raises Lazarus, he is not simply interrupting a private tragedy. He is interrupting a system that depends on keeping people small, silent, and contained. The religious leaders, they see the stakes of the miracle immediately. But their fear is not a theological one. It's not theological confusion. It is political calculation. There is no, this is theologically confusing. Rather, as Caiaphas says, better one man die than the whole nation be destroyed. It's a cold logic that preserves a system by sacrificing the disruptive one. That's the logic of empire. Keep order at any cost. Resurrection threatens that logic because it loosens fear and it undermines control. When life returns where death seemed final, the machinery of oppression trembles. Now, John heightens this impossibility of what happens next by the clock. In early Jewish midrash, in the commentary that is of the Old Testament by various rabbis, the first 3 days after death are the window in which hope might still cling. There's a chance of revival. After 3 days, the community accepts that the soul has departed. John makes the story worse. Lazarus has been dead 4 days. Even Martha says, "Lord, that smell is awful." There is no medical or religious wiggle room. There is no, maybe he's just sleeping. He is, to borrow from the words of Miracle Max from The Princess Bride, not mostly dead, but all dead. The tomb is sealed, hope seems exhausted. And that cultural horizon matters. The miracle is not merely surprising, it is scandalous. It ruptures the accepted boundaries between life and death, between what the powerful can control and what God summons into being. Resurrection after the accepted limit is public, political act as much as theological one. And notice Who speaks in this story? Lazarus is silent in this narrative. He is sick, he dies, he walks out. The theological work in this passage is done by Martha and Mary. Martha meets Jesus first and offers one of the clearest confessions in the gospel. I believe that you are the Christ, God's Son. In a patriarchal, occupied world, a grieving, racialized woman names Christological truth with clarity. Mary falls at Jesus' feet and weeps. Her grief is not a private emotion to be dismissed. Their lament, Lord, if you had been here, is honest and theologically charged. And Jesus, he doesn't rebuke them for feeling or expressing it. He does not offer platitudes or corrections. He stands with them and weeps. This is a radical centering of equity-deserving groups. People and communities harmed by systemic exclusion. In a church and a world that has too often silenced women, queer people, disabled, BIPOC communities, and other equity-deserving groups, John 11 insists that revelation and confession can come from the edges. If we are serious about justice, we must attend to theology where power has tried to silence it. John gives us a single devastating line in verse 35. In our version, it sounds kind of tame. He began to cry. But literally, it says Jesus wept. And Jesus knows what he will do. He knows resurrection is coming. Yet he stands before the tomb and shares the sorrow of the community. He does not rush to explanation or to a tidy answer. He enters grief before he enacts power. And I think this matters for how we imagine God and how we practice community and ministry together. God is not a detached problem solver who appears only to fix things from a distance. God is present in sorrow, weeping with those who weep. For communities who have known the weight of injustice, families who have buried children too soon, people crushed by racist systems, queer and trans siblings who have been abandoned or harmed, disabled folks who experience systemic neglect, this is not a small detail. It tells us that solidarity precedes hope. Compassion and empathy are not an optional preface to power. It is the power. When Lazarus comes out of the tomb, he is alive but still bound. Hands and feet wrapped, face covered. Jesus does not unwrap him. He turns to the gathered people and says, "Untie him, unbind him, and let him go." Resurrection begins with divine calling, but liberation requires communal participation. This is a crucial image for our work of justice and decolonization. Systems will bind people. Fear, trauma, poverty, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableist practices, and colonial structures. Even when life is restored, those bindings remain unless the community acts. The command to unbind is a call for the church and to society. Do the messy, relational work of liberating one another. It's not enough for a miracle to happen. We must help people shed the grave clothes that keep them from self-actualization. That is, the desire to become more and more what one is, to become everything that one is capable of becoming. A note about self-actualization. I wouldn't normally use that term. And I've often understood it in a very individualistic way. But I will say that through conversations with Laurie, their own learning from Indigenous colleagues and scholars in education, I've learned a lot more. If we can bring up that slide. You've probably read about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's the triangle on the left. In 1938, some of you may already know this, Maslow traveled to Alberta to live there 6 weeks among the Siksika Blackfoot Nation. What he observed there shaped his thinking. I will say that some Siksika believe what he did was cultural appropriation, but not everyone, and there is more to that story, and I'm happy to share resources if people are interested. Unlike the social hierarchies he saw elsewhere, he did not find a drive for domination among the Siksika ways of knowing and being. He observed a community that leaves no one behind. Mutual aid, low inequality, children treated as equals, restorative justice, high life satisfaction, and wealth measured by generosity rather than possessions or property. The Siksika language doesn't actually have the word self-actualization, but there is an Indigenous scholar from the Siksika nation who says they do have a word for someone who is completely developed or has arrived. The thinking is very similar. So when we engage with self-actualization, when we think about it or use it, we must decolonize our perspectives and practices. True self-actualization is not an isolated achievement, but part of community flourishing and liberation, which you see on the other triangle. Self-actualization within the Siksika nation was the foundation from which everything else flourished. Self-actualization, community actualization, and then cultural perpetuity returns. Again, I'm happy to share where I got this from. Thanks, Tuesday. So the silence of Lazarus in the story shifts the focus away from a single heroic testimony and toward the community's responsibility. Resurrection is not a private spectacle for the powerful to claim. It is a shared task that requires community participation and mutual aid. And so, if resurrection threatens the empire, then this story is inherently political and liberative. To follow Jesus here is to stand against systems that preserve order by sacrificing the vulnerable and maintaining the status quo. It means naming and resisting racism, ableism, colonial violence, white supremacy, and the ways heteronormativity and cis-normativity are enforced. It means centering the perspective of those most harmed: women, queer and trans people, disabled, indigenous, Black and racialized communities, immigrants, the poor, and trusting their lived experience and theological insight. So a decolonizing lens of this passage, it refuses to let empire define what is normal or inevitable. It refuses the calculus that says maintaining privilege and hierarchy in a system is worth the life of equity-deserving groups. An anti-racist lens names how power uses death and fear to control, and summons the community to dismantle those structures. A queer-affirming lens names how power a queer-affirming lens recognizes that God's life-giving invitation is not limited by the categories empire imposes. And a disability justice lens recognizes that flourishing depends not on erasing differences, but on creating accessible relationships, resources, and mutual care that honor every person's dignity. God beckons across perceived boundaries, bringing to life that which is dead, inviting communities to unbind those who have been constrained by shame, power, and exclusion. To be a community that unbinds is to practice transformative justice, to remove the grave clothes of stigma, to repair harm, to redistribute power, and to create spaces free from oppression, where flourishing and self-actualization are the foundation. So John 11, it gives us a God who weeps and a God who calls a name. It gives us women who speak truth and a community called to unbind. It gives us a resurrection that is both sign and summons, a sign that death does not have the final word, and a summons to participate in the work of liberation. Lazarus will die again. This miracle, it doesn't abolish mortality, but it does insist that death does not get to define reality. Grief is met with tears, not dismissal or reprisal. Hope is not postponed to some distant future. It breaks into the present. When Jesus calls, the tomb cannot hold what God intends for life. So pay attention to that summons today. Lazarus, come out, and act on the command, unbind. May we be the kind of community that answers, that communes with the grieving, centers equity-deserving perspectives, resists empire, and does the hard work of unbinding so that all may experience liberation. Amen.